Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Squad Room, episode 33. I'm your host, Garrett Tesla. The Squad Room is about developing, optimizing, and maintaining the health and wellness of myself and other law enforcement officers around the world. Health and wellness mean a lot of things, and I explore it all here. How can we maintain and improve our mental health, our emotional health, our mindfulness, our relationships, all the things that I want to be better at. The show is about my journey as a law enforcement officer, trying to get healthier by evaluating my own life and by reaching out to experts to see what I can learn from them. I talk to other cops, doctors, meditation experts, anyone who could be a force multiplier in my fitness. Today's guest is former Navy SEAL and right-hand man to General Stanley McChrystal, David Silverman, co-author of Team of Teams. Stay with us. All right, episode 33. Here we are. So my guest today is David Silverman. I read David's book long before I ever thought I had a shot at having him on the show. And I've read the book by his former boss already. His former boss is 4-star General Stanley McChrystal. And if you're into leadership books, especially military leadership books, I highly recommend General McChrystal's first book, My Share of the Task. Phenomenal book. So when General McChrystal's second book came out, called Team of Teams, I picked it up, of course, right away. And it's a great book if you are someone in your department who is in a position, or maybe you're looking to get into a position to affect some change and to change away from the excuses of that's how we do it, that's just the way it's always been done, to a new model. And I think that the model that General McChrystal developed for the military is completely appropriate for police work. And for that, for the paradigm that we work in. We have faced a lot of the same challenges that the Army does or that the military did. We face those same challenges in a civilian capacity. So one of the authors of the book, or co-authors of the book, is a gentleman named David Silverman. David is a former US Navy SEAL. He's a graduate of the Naval Academy, and you'll hear his whole story here coming up. I knew David's name, and I knew that he was a co-author of the book. And in chatting with my the owner of Gravitas Fitness, Eric Malzone, our guest from episode 4, he offhandedly mentioned that he and David are good high school friends. And I don't know why Eric withheld this information from me for the first 3 years of our friendship. But anyway, I'm glad he did, because he connected us up, and I got to have a great conversation with David about leadership, performing at a high level, leveling up, as it were. My curiosity was, David and I are the same age, and how did he manage to get himself into a position where he was a right-hand man to General McChrystal in the military, and then when they left the military, he went and formed a company with the general in the civilian world as a consulting, and they started CrossLead, among other projects. Now, you can probably tell that I'm a bit of a fanboy, I guess, of the general, and that's true. I really admire his book. I admire his straightforwardness. I'll link to some things and some talks that he's done, and I think they're phenomenal. So I was happy to talk to David to find out about how he was able to position himself for those opportunities, what was expected of him in those opportunities. How did he take on leadership? How did he find functioning with or working with such a high-functioning, high-level individual? It was a great conversation with David, and I appreciate all of his time. So we'll get to that. But, of course, I want to thank SB Tactical and the iCombat Training System for sponsoring this show. Check out their active shooter training system, the iCombat Active Shooter Training System, at sbtactical.com. They have 2 systems they're working with now. One, of course, is for law enforcement agencies that you can either rent or purchase, and the other is for the in-home officer. They're called the iCombat Pro. The agency version, for lack of a better term, is a replica AR-15 and a replica Glock pistol that functions and cycles and produces muzzle flashes, and you wear a vest that fits over all of your duty uniform stuff. And you're able to get some feedback on shot placement. Think great active shooter training scenario out in the real world. Boston SWAT used it in the mayor's office. LAPD uses it. Lots of different agencies use it. College campus police use it all the time because they can go onto a college campus without having to do live fire, without having to do simulations or paintball. There's no mess, no cleanup. It's pretty cool. SBTactical.com. They're a veteran-owned company. They're American-made. They're phenomenal guys, and they're super supportive of the show. So please give them a shout-out. You can also follow them on Instagram at SB tactical.com. Oh, real quick before we begin, I wanted to give you a heads up that the audio in this episode is a little goofy. I was able to fix most of it, but we recorded it in a different audio program, and some of it didn't come out quite right. So his volume was way louder than mine, and so I had to do some tweaking. So you'll hear some audio bumps occasionally, and I apologize for that, but just a heads up, it's not your stereo. It's the way that we all recorded. All right, so here's Dave. All right, David Silverman, thanks for being on the show today. Welcome. You're coming from D.C., is that right, where you are?
Yeah, I'm in D.C.
You're one of my first transcontinental interviews, I guess. So that's great. So I gave an introduction about your background before we got on the show here, and people know a little bit about you now going into this. So I guess my first question was, General McChrystal, General Stanley McChrystal, four-star general, now retired, was well known for reinventing the approach and the tactics to the global war on terror. And I read his first book, My Share of the Task, amazing book, a great leadership book for anybody to read. And he talks a lot about the team that he built when he was serving, and you were part of that team. And I guess the first question on my mind is, how did your paths cross as a Navy SEAL with a 3 then 4-star general in the Army?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show today. Let me, I'll just take you a little bit back through my history to try to answer your question comprehensively. I graduated the Naval Academy in 1998 and then went through training immediately afterwards, and then checked into SEAL Team 5 around 1999. And I spent the next better part of 11, 12 years bouncing around different teams throughout the community, serving in various theaters of operation, to include the South Pacific, Asia, and Iraq and Afghanistan. And we were going through a transformation both as a SEAL community, kind of coming out of the legacy of the 80s and 90s and into this new world. And that experience would be transformational as far as the evolution that started to take place in the SEAL community, but in the broader special operations community, specifically those focused on counterterrorism operations. General McChrystal took command of the premier counterterrorism force in 2003, and he immediately started to see a need to make this radical shift from a legacy organization that was designed to respond to terrorist threats around the world to something that was much more nimble, agile, and proactive in design. And for us, for myself, I was a very junior member of the community, kind of coming up through the ranks and leading men. We started to benefit from this transformation, because primarily what he did is he opened up access for communication and learning to a much broader group than that was traditionally a pretty small and focused subset of the special operations community. So my first time I passed across was when I was augmenting one of those mission critical elements in Afghanistan in 2005, and then I would deploy to Iraq in later that year in 2005 through 2006, and command a lot of the task force that was going after high-value targets in the Baghdad AOR. And I was partnered with an Iraqi counterterrorism unit, and at the time, General McChrystal's command headquarters was looking to expand into leveraging host nation partners for some of their operations, definitely specifically the ones that are involving sensitive targets like mosques and so forth. And so we took a troop from our task unit or troop, and we assigned it to one of his echelon commanders in Baghdad, which was one of the Army Special Operations components, and we then sort of were in support of their operations on a daily basis hunting. So that was when I first got a chance to experience it really up close and personal. I would come back from that experience in 2006, go to D.C. and spend the next 2 years doing legislative affairs for the special operations community, working with Congress and the Senate. And I was getting out of the Navy, and General McChrystal was now the director of the Joint Staff, and he was then selected to go back and command all the forces in Afghanistan. And when he did that, they said they're going to put the same band back together that ran this transformation for counterterrorism and see if it could be applied to the broader effort in Afghanistan. And a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, would you be interested in serving?" And I said, "I would be." I had not talked to my wife at the time, so and she thought I was planning to get out. We were going to have children. And so it was one of those, yeah, sure, throw my name in the hat, see what happens. Well, about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from the head detailer for the SEAL community saying, hey, you have a by-name request from the general to go serve on his personal staff. You leave in a week, and the tour says up to 5 years, which I was like, wow, this is going to be a fun conversation when I get home tonight with my wife. So I spent the next 13 minutes working directly for the general on his staff, helping out with plans and operations, and it was like getting that PhD in leadership. I got to see behind the scenes on how he drove this new way of leading and managing that we now call CrossLead, which was fantastic because I had lived it at the tactical and sort of operational level, so to see it behind the scenes was, and from his perspective, was very enlightening. And so we would take that, and that would be the nexus for the book we wrote, which is called Team of Teams, and the model that we now run in our company, which is CrossLead.
I have a hard time having a conversation with my wife, reminding her I'm going back to night shift. So I can't imagine what conversation you have to have for.
Yeah. It was. She was. We've been married at this point for, wow, almost 9 years, and I probably hadn't spent much time with her, less than like 100 days. So I think she was sort of used to me being gone. But the whole thought was, if I ever wanted to have children, this was my chance. I had to stop being Navy SEAL to get out and do that. And she was like, no problem, you go do your thing. But we're obviously not going to have kids until this is over. So it was painful, but she understood. That's who she married. She married someone who really believed in service, and there's no way for me I could reconcile, 50 years from now, talking to my grandkids that I had an opportunity to help, probably the most transformational leader this country's produced in 60 years, try to change the course of this effort, which I believe to be one of the defining conflicts of our generation, and not do it. It wouldn't have been right for me personally.
Yeah. Okay. So when you graduated from the Naval Academy, and that's when you went to SEAL Team 5 right away. Now, I might be getting my years mixed up a little bit, but Clint Bruce has been a guest on this show too, and I believe he was SEAL Team 5 around the same time. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were there together. Clint was a year ahead of me at the academy. Big football stud, captain, awesome guy, and he was at SEAL Team 5. He was an assistant platoon commander, then a platoon commander there. So he was in his first platoon when I showed up and was in purgatory, waiting to get my trident. But he was a larger-than-life figure at the command for sure.
And help me understand a little bit that rank promotion from you leave the academy as a first lieutenant, right? And then, which is the equivalent of a assistant platoon commander, and then
So in the Navy, when you get commissioned, you're an ensign in the Navy. And you go in the first 2 years, you basically spend that grade, and as long as you can fog and mirror, you make Lieutenant JG, which is the next pay grade. And again, assuming you don't, do something really, really retarded, you get promoted again to lieutenant at the 4-year mark. So the first 2 years, a good year of that, I was at was just in BUDS training, and then going through what's called SEAL qualification training, and so I would have done my first platoon, which I was a third officer in a platoon, which was a relatively new position at the time because they had too many officers they had assessed in, and so there was 3 officers in a platoon. So it was the chain of command and the responsibility was sort of non-standard to the traditional model at the time. And then I went to Guam as an action officer in the unit where I represented special operations, specifically the Navy SEALs, and with host countries, helping them get ready for, prepare for, or stop different terrorist activities in their region. And again, this would have been right after 9/11. That was a pretty quick call. In fact, I wasn't expecting to go over there, but they relieved a guy, and they needed somebody to go, and I said I would do it if I could come back and take an OIC position of a platoon coming out of it, which I did. And I came back to SEAL Team 3 and did my OIC platoon. This time I went to southern Philippines and operated there for 7 months when they were going against their Islamic threat, radical Islamic threat down south. Some of this is an ongoing insurgency that they've been dealing with since the Pershing days, turn of the century, and some of it was potentially more radicalized based on camps coming out of Indonesia at the time. And then I came back from that, and then I went to Afghanistan, like I talked about, for a couple of months with as a staff officer, and then I went back to Iraq as a troop commander. So I had now a couple platoons underneath me, and then a bunch of augmentation. And I was partnered with a Green Beret SIF element, and we partnered with the Iraqi, their version of their Delta Force for about 7 months. And then I came back, did a couple of years in D.C., and then went back to Afghanistan for 13 months. So that was kind of the tour. And over that time frame, I'd get promoted. So ensign for the first tour, JG for the second, into lieutenant for the third, and then I was sort of spot promoted to 04 for the Baghdad tour, and then for DC, just continued on, and then I got out right at the end of that, right when I was being selected for what would have been commander in the Navy, or 05.
It's a funny way to ask this, or I don't know, but what is it about your personality or you or your experience you think that allowed you to position yourself to get into a position to work so closely with such a high-level group of people?
Yeah, so growing up, I always kind of liked being on teams, and I played my father made me do a lot of sports, not because I was any good. He just thought it was the right thing to do if you're a young kid to keep you out of trouble. And I sort of found my niche in the water when I moved to San Diego back when elementary school. So I bounced around a lot as a kid because my dad was in the Navy. And I started to pick up this a sport called water polo. So I got pretty decent at water polo. I played for some remarkable coaches. A guy down in Coronado by the name of Randy Burgess, who's probably produced as many Olympians as any high school and middle school program in the country. And then I went to a powerhouse high school called Bellarmine College Prep in San Jose, which was 2 years I was there. We were national champions in water polo. So and had this notoriously hard, but the winningest coach in California history. And so he instilled this level of discipline and commitment and mindset of what it was like to be a part of a really high-performing elite team that I said, hey, look, I want to keep this thing going. And so when I was trying to make a decision on college, I had some choices on some schools in California, and ultimately ended up going to the Naval Academy because I said, well, I want to try to be a Navy SEAL, and I believe this will be the continuation of what an elite team looks like, and that I can make a profession out of it. And so I was fortunate enough to get selected for the SEAL program at the Academy, which is pretty competitive, and got to the community, got everything I expected. I mean, it's just a remarkable community. It has incredibly talented and gifted.
So I'm sorry. So you said you had decided you wanted to become a SEAL. Was it your dad's influence, or was it what was it about the SEALs themselves that drew you to that?
Well, first I wanted to serve, and because my father had served, his father had served, so that was important to me. And then what appealed to me about the SEAL community was initially I wanted to be a pilot because my dad was a pilot, and I didn't have the eyesight for it. It's all correctable now, but back then you had to have perfect vision to be selected. So I said, well, what else is there? And we were living in Coronado at the time, and I kept seeing these guys running along the beach, in really bad-looking shorts. And I said, well, who are those guys? And he said, well, those guys are a bunch of lunatics. Those are the SEAL community. And I said, well, that sounds like exactly the type of group I want to be part of. So that sort of piqued the interest, back in the day. And before I would say this last war, you had to kind of look out and try to find the SEAL community. It was a pretty quiet organization that very few people knew about, and that's very different from how it's positioned now with all the media and attention and stuff. So this started for me when I was really young, in middle school.
Yeah, that seems like it's obviously now SEALs are on the front end of a lot of different, of course, books and all that too, but leadership and stuff like the organization you're running now, CrossLead, or Jocko Willink has a very popular book and popular podcast now. People are definitely drawn to that experience. What is it you think about the military service, or maybe military service during wartime, that is so popular that those lessons that the other, not NGOs, but also other government work and also corporate world feel they can bring back, or lessons they can learn from that?
So what I would say is I think there's a rich tradition in this country's history that during times of need, people stand up and serve. And they learn invaluable lessons, because it's hard to replicate the environment of warfare and the forcing function that has on everything from innovation to leadership and management theory and practice. And if you look at this country's history, a lot of the innovations that have been translated back into society to hopefully make it better came from during these times of need and great pressure. War itself is awful. I don't think anybody would wish it or want to go to it. I mean, I think you sort of romanticize it before you do it, but once you're there, it's pretty terrifying and humbling as an experience. And so, we felt passionately, here at CrossLead, that there was an opportunity to capture some of these lessons and bring it back to society, help make the country great. Similar to what our forefathers did. So we saw this as a continuation of our legacy and really our obligation to continue to serve in some capacity because the country's afforded us some incredible opportunities, and we think these lessons that we learned were relevant to the environment that our industries are facing. And if America is going to continue to be a strong, relevant force in the world, which I personally believe is a good thing, then it's important that we learn and we continue to advance and adapt and evolve.
And what are, if you had to pick, or what would you say are maybe 3 or 4 of those key lessons that you now practice and preach that are applicable to, government work? I mean, the military is obviously government too, but oftentimes it's parsed between that and, like my audience and my profession obviously is law enforcement. What are some of the things that you think translate well?
Yeah, so I would say that, to me, the biggest innovation and reflection that came out of the last, kind of 15 years has been this acceptance and understanding of how much more complex the environment is today than it used to be. So things were always complicated, and there was always different processes and procedures you could use to efficiently and effectively address those challenges. And what we're seeing today with just the massive advancements in technology is that the ability for a single individual to have a disproportionate impact on the environment around them is far greater now than they ever been. So let me give you an example that's probably near and dear to the people that are probably close to where you're calling from, or I'm calling into from, which is this radicalized couple in San Bernardino that basically goes on a killing spree. And what they're able to do is put some of that information and propaganda through various social media sites that now disproportionately have a massive impact on the globe. And so in the old days, if you did something like that, you could pretty much contain it. Now it goes viral and can touch up to 500 million viewers and watchers that could then radicalize and inspire somebody else to do something sort of catastrophic. So the ability for connection points, the interconnectedness of today's environment, really enabled through technology, necessitates an entirely different mindset and approach to how you try to adjust those organizations. And what we found, the 2 main lessons that take away from this are, you have to try to create what we call shared consciousness or centralized communication and understanding, so that you can kind of crowdsource learning and experiences as close to real time as possible. And then you have to empower people. So you have to decentralize decision making. So centralized communication, but decentralized decision making, so that people can operate at the pace and speed necessary to deal with the rapidly changing conditions. And so what you're doing is you're creating a virtuous feedback loop. So you centralize your communication to kind of get constant feedback of what's happening in the environment, and then you apply those understandings and learnings to the new decisions you make and the actions that you take. So this is software designers figured this out in design-based practices in the late 90s and early 2000s, and has rapidly accelerated the life cycle of a consumer product dealing in technology. And you have to do the same thing to how you run or organize your agency or your business if you're going to be successful. Over.
Yeah. I see that we struggle with in law enforcement in these silos of the criminal justice system. There's the law enforcement, and then there's the district attorney's office, and then there's probation, or there's corrections, or there's social services, or all the alcohol, mental health programs. All those things still don't connect, or still don't cooperate like they could. And reading his first book, but then reading Team of Teams, was sort of to me the blueprint of how we can get better at that. And it was exactly those things of that centralized communication but decentralized control. It seems like there's a lot of opportunity there to directly apply that from a war into law enforcement, and how to solve the problems of just keeping people safe, fighting crime, but also rehabilitating people too as well. So I thought the book was great for that. we kind of just touched on the premise of the book, but can you explain that a little bit? This idea of team of teams.
Yeah. So the basic premise there was, a lot of us, and in law enforcement, this is, I think well demonstrated as well, have been a part of a very high functioning, high performing small team, and you got to have certain capabilities that manifest to be successful there. And the challenge is typically when you start to scale in size, it becomes much harder, and naturally what happens is those small teams become more tribal or insular because they say, well, this larger enterprise can't possibly operate at the same pace and level of effectiveness as my small team can, so we'll just kind of do our thing, they'll do their thing, and hopefully it works out. And we found that those gaps and seams that existed between those different tribes to be systemic risk, really, to an enemy, in our case, that was able to exploit those gaps and seams and operate faster inside a decision-making cycle of the larger bureaucracy. So it was very disorienting because if we ever engaged with the enemy, we won. So every single time we would go into like a fight. I mean, almost without exception, we'd have success. Yet collectively, as an enterprise or as a war effort, the situation was getting much, much worse. And so that was disorienting because you're having success and everything you're doing is working, yet the problem's getting worse and worse. It's almost like you can't keep up with this cancer that keeps just metastasizing and spreading. So it necessitated us to try to change. And in the change, what we realized was we had to recreate what it was like to be on a small team on a enterprise level or a team-of-team level. And so by saying, well, what are the fundamentals that make a small team great? Well, small teams tend to have high degrees of trust. They tend to be aligned on purpose of what they're trying to do. And those things are the most important things if you're trying to get a small team to be effective. But the other two things it does sort of naturally is it shares information and collaborates learnings. You tend to work in open environments. You know something, your buddy knows it, and you've got a high degree of interconnectedness going on between team members. And the second thing you do is people tend to be empowered. They tend to know their role, responsibility on the team. So, like if you look at a fire team in a SEAL platoon, the machine gunner knows his job, the communicator knows their job, the corpsman or medic knows their job, and you've got some type of patrol leader who knows their job. And so when something happens, they just sort of naturally do what they got to do. They don't have to talk or see; they just know it. The problem is, how do you do that at scale, right? So, and that was what really the book was about, was replicating that same experience you have in a small team, in a team-to-team environment, that are able to dramatically increase, that shared consciousness or those interconnection points between the different team members that allow you then to get smarter, faster, which then allows you to empower people to make decisions faster at their respective levels. And the transparency that's created by the shared conscious creates a virtuous accountability mechanism that allows the leaders to then feel more comfortable empowering again. So, I think General McChrystal's philosophy was eyes on, hands off. Like, as long as you can see it, you didn't have to touch it. As soon as you couldn't see it and didn't understand it, then he would start rooting around, and that usually became an unpleasant experience for those involved.
I would imagine. So can these ideas be applied to government work too, not just enterprise companies, but and we have a lot of listeners of this show are first line supervisors, sergeants and lieutenants. What are some of the things they can do to help implement this if they're trying to change an organization that's maybe a little stale and stalled?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look, this was started in that environment, right? So, back in the day, SEALs didn't get along with the Rangers didn't get along with Delta, and SEALs and Delta hate each other, and then all of us don't like the aviators, and the intel people, we think, like, sit around and eat lettuce all day or something. So there was these huge tribal dynamics that didn't allow people to want to work together. And ironically, the way it was originally designed is that was okay, because the thought was if you had two kind of competing elements, that they would naturally keep each other honest because they would constantly be competing against each other for like a mission or a task. Well, once you get overwhelmed with requirements, then all of a sudden that doesn't really matter anymore, and now you have to figure out how to work together. And so what I would tell a sergeant who's running a research department or division is go out of your way to connect and collaborate with your larger network that is going to have some benefit or impact on your goal or objective. I mean, it's not natural because most people believe that if you know something before somebody else, you can either take credit for it or it gives you some type of power or control. My experience in the new environment is quite the opposite. If you know something before somebody else, and you don't, and you can't share on it, and therefore can't act because you need some other authority or capability set to accomplish your mission, well then everybody loses in that situation. And in fact, the environment's changing so fast that you don't know who needs to know what and when, so it's hard to kind of control or contain it. In fact, if you can create a collaboration forum where you're exchanging information and probably going past the 50-yard line and being transparent and sharing, then you'll force people to return back to that meeting or that forum or that venue to get access to that information, which will then by design give you control, right? So, I mean, think of it from a technology standpoint. Google puts a search optimization engine online for everybody to use for free. And you can go in there and ask any question and get some form of an answer coming out of it. Well, and it's free. But the reality is, because it's free and everybody gets value out of it, they keep going back to it. And by going back to it, then Google can control the experience by which you're getting the information. Well, the same was true with my experience overseas. By creating that medium where you can collaborate, eventually people have to keep coming back in, and then you can start to steer and guide the direction of what it is you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, more efficiently and effectively. So you get some semblance of control back, is my point, by being transparent and sharing.
It's an interesting point. I never thought of that aspect of it, but it seems that you're absolutely right. So back to working with these high-level people again, and then becoming high-level yourself, because we have a mutual friend in Eric Malzone, and so I'm guessing we're about the same age, roughly, because Eric and I are the same age. So I say becoming because you went through that process yourself, and working for a general is, I'm imagining, quite a demanding job, something like what you were doing, and I imagine it still is in the relationship that you have. How did you approach that daily interaction and that daily task of working in such a high-speed environment, for the lack of a better term, and what tools, tips, or tricks did you use, or did you find that help you succeed in those environments, and that you use today too? Because now you're, as CEO of CrossLead, you're dealing with very high-level people in the corporate world now.
Yeah. So what I would say is, it's really important to be aware of what your strengths and weaknesses are as an individual and as a leader, and how you optimally function as a person, right? So for me, it was all about trying to instill a level of consistency and discipline. This started at a much younger age, obviously, with some of these coaches that I mentioned earlier. But everybody has an operating rhythm or cadence. We call it a battle rhythm that you operate with. And you can basically map it out on a day, week, month, quarter, annual basis. And you say, well, this is the cycle that I go through. People that spend time getting understanding and awareness of what they're operating with them will likely be more consistent and disciplined on executing against it, which will likely produce better and more consistent results for you as an individual. So, for instance, for me, like, I've got to work out in the mornings. If I don't work out in the mornings, then my day doesn't get off to the right start. I don't know that I'm particularly a morning person or not a morning person. I tend to do pretty well in the mornings on a personal level. But what I do know is that as a CEO and founder of a company, the day's going to get away from me, right? Things are going to come at me that I didn't expect or was on the schedule, and the likelihood of being able to make up the time later is because increasingly higher. It's much less likely someone's going to bug you at 4 a.m. to 5:30. You can more or less control that time frame for the most part. So you can put some controls in place that allow you to maintain this proper balance that allows you to operate at the optimal level. I think that goes into like dietary. It goes into sleep. And it goes into like how you correspond, whether it be through email, phone, chat, face-to-face, or what have you. But figuring out and understanding how you peak perform is critically important. And then you have to extend that one step further to the team around you, right? So because how you show up consistently then allows other people to cue off of you. And that predictability lowers the cognitive load and uncertainty on other people in the environment, which allows everybody to perform at a higher level. So, I mean, the whole idea that makes an individual, I think, elite or a small team elite is they're really, 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 really good at the fundamentals. And by being very good at the fundamentals, it allows them to have excess capacity to deal with rapidly changing environments. So for us in a SEAL platoon, you never know what the target's going to give you when you go on it. Right, Murphy's Law is sort of rules. Or if you're a law enforcement going into a house, you're sort of trained to expect the unexpected, And what's gonna make the difference in that decisive moment of NGAT for these mission critical teams is your ability to rapidly assess a situation and make quick decisions and react faster inside of the decision space of that of your adversary or enemy. And the way you do that is by having incredible fundamentals. So you don't have to think about the basics. They just happen naturally because you drilled it 10,000 hours. And so then you can react faster, more effectively in that space, and you have a competitive advantage. And that is true in all things. So if you've gotten your workout in the morning and all of a sudden something blows it up, you know that you've at least got it done enough for you physically that's going to set your mental condition, the right mindset to be successful later. If you're inconsistent and undisciplined, this starts to fall apart pretty quickly.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about it on the show about, I call it like cognitive fatigue, but eliminating those things that exhaust your mind that you have to make the same decision over and over and over again, leaves you with less brain power or energy or enthusiasm to make the decisions that you're saying, have to be made in a split second. And I found that to be absolutely true for me, that if I can eliminate or make consistent as many decisions throughout the day as possible, that I'm set up well to lead a squad during night shift and make decisions at 3 a.m. that I wouldn't necessarily maybe be very sharp on making if I didn't have that. So that's been a huge thing for me to learn too. What are when you graduated from the Naval Academy and you went to the teams and you started in this, I guess middle management an okay term to use for an ensign and first lieutenant there?
I mean, you're an officer, so I guess you're in a leadership position, but you're pretty junior. I mean, you're really heavily relying upon your senior enlisted that know everything, have the experience. You're basically just there to be a sponge in the first couple of years. Yeah,
and so I'm guessing I know the answer to this question, but starting in that position and then going through the ranks like you did, and then working at such a high level like that, do you find that sometimes being a good leader requires good followership, and how do you sometimes maybe be a good follower or what are the tips for being a good follower when maybe you don't necessarily understand or agree with the decision above you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. So I would say as a junior officer in a platoon, the first couple of years out, like I said, you're really just on receive mode if you're smart, and if not, your platoon typically helps you get there. There's a self-correcting mechanism for cocky young ensigns, as I probably learned firsthand. As you gain a little more experience and credibility, I liken it to being on a sports team where you become sort of the captain by the time you're like the senior, as being a platoon commander, meaning you command the respect of your men primarily based on the quality of your ability to perform, based on pre-existing standards. And if you can't do that, then you're not going to be the captain for very long and earn their respect. It is a well, there is a chain of command, certainly in the military. I would say in the special operations community, specifically in the SEALs, it is earned, not given. And if you can't earn it from the men, you won't be effective as a leader. So you work hard at being or trying to be competent at the fundamentals and earn the respect of your people, and you do that by being a good listener, primarily, because your platoon chief and LPO, they're going to forgotten more than you possibly learn in their experience, and you're heavily relying upon them and their expertise and to send you in the right direction. When you come out of that as a platoon commander, though, you have to make this transition into what I would call mid-level management, where now you're at this 04 level in the military. There's 10 levels of rank. 04 is really the first time you start to take on, the more experience. Well, now potentially you're actually a peer as far as life experience of some of those more senior enlisted individuals in the community, and you're expected to assume more decision making and responsibility, and more importantly, you have to get some separation from what it was like to be one of the guys on a daily basis, and so you walk slightly different line. And I think that's the adjustment period for most officers that becomes probably the most difficult in their maturation process, because they're expected now to kind of think on their own and make decisions that sometimes won't be as popular, but likely or hopefully are for the best of the community, the organization. And you tend to get into more of the administrative stuff, which is obviously a hell of a lot less interesting than running things, right? So you tend to see two things happen. You see a lot of people get out because that's not really what they signed up for. They signed up for to kind of run and gun and be one of the guys, and or you see people you naturally get detailed away from the community. So for me, going to DC, I was outside of a platoon, outside of the SEALs. I mean, I was representing the SEALs. I still work for the SEALs, but I wasn't with the guys every day, and so that was a very different feeling than being with the boys. It was a staff job, right? And staff jobs, you learn a lot, but they're not nearly as it was never in the brochure. You didn't sign up for that.
I want to go back a little bit to kind of the day-to-day, but I guess I have two questions. One is, what was your day-to-day like when you were there in in Iraq, right, with General McChrystal, working in that top team when you were there for those 13 months, and what's your typical day consist of now as the CEO of a private organization?
Yeah, so I would say they're pretty similar. From an individual operating rhythm, so first of all, when you're working for the 4-star, his bad rhythm is your bad rhythm, right? So what makes him optimally perform, your job is primarily and first and foremost to set him up for success, to perform at the highest level possible. So I was one of a much larger staff. I think there's probably 90 of us in total. That was sole responsibility was trying to optimize the general's time and activities to be as effective as possible. And so I ran future ops and plans, so I had a little more daylight from like his aides or his executive officer, who was really my boss, who were just trying to keep up with him on a minute-by-minute basis. I had the ability to go a little bit farther, say, hey, well, this is what we're going to do next, and then reverse out. So I tend to get up. We did a stand-up every morning at 7:30 in Afghanistan, where it was a quick sync on the intelligence from last night and activities for the day going forward. And so I would be up probably within 30 minutes of that meeting, check email downstairs for the meeting, and then I would go hard really until about 1 in the morning, and I'd probably get a workout in around midday, and then repeat. Now, the general was up much earlier than that. He would get up around I think 3:30 or 4, but then he would also try to have him down by 9:30, 10 every day. So his aides were kind of up with him at sunrise or close to it, or before sunrise really. And then I would be up past that to make sure like a lot of the admin logistics got taken in place and were ready. So it was a good 18-hour day. I would say the stress level on being on a staff job is different than commanding than in combat, which was the previous deployment I'd had. I don't think it's as intense. Obviously, it was when you're going out on a nightly basis and putting everyone's lives in risk. But I would say the gravity of what we were doing was and obviously the impact it was having was much, much, much greater. So it was an incredible learning experience. How I would compare that to now is I think it's similar stress, right? Being an entrepreneur, starting a business is hard. It's really hard. I mean, I was good at what I did when I went to be on General McChrystal's staff, so I knew how to like plan a trip and align a plan with activities. Starting a business, I didn't know anything, so I mean, I had to learn everything, kind of trial by fire, and so that cognitive load is pretty weighted pretty heavily. So trying to get into a consistent rhythm was to me much, much harder, and I made a ton of mistakes. In fact, I still make a ton of mistakes every day. But my motto in life is get right quick. Because if you don't, the alternative isn't very good typically. So you just keep your nose to the grind. You just grind through it. But it feels a little bit like the chaos and the complexity of being in combat with the uncertainty of knowing that you're not very good at what your fundamentals aren't there. And that to me is obviously a lot harder because whether I was in Baghdad commanding SEALs or being on a staff, I had a lot of confidence in my team and my team's fundamentals and in my ability to kind of keep up. And I would say in the private sector, I had none of that, right? So you're learning all that as you're building it. Now at the same time, bullets aren't flying, so it's not the same. People talk about the risk. It's not the same, obviously, right? So I'm not trying to compare it, but the stress is comparable though.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you talked about working out. The general's famous for eating one meal a day. So what are the other things you used to maintain at that high level, whether it was the nutrition you used or supplements or off-duty activities? What was it that you used to stay at a peak performance?
Yeah, so for me, I'm not sure I'm in peak physical performance like I like to be anymore, but I would say at the high, what you're doing is you're making sure you're getting at least an hour of physical activity that involves sweating in a day, and you try to do that on a regular cadence. Ideally, you're getting a quality amount of sleep. I think in combat, realistically, like if you got 4 or 5 hours, you're doing pretty good. But optimally, I know the science would support something greater than that. 6 to 8, unless you got unique, unless you're like Bill Clinton or something, you got some unique sleep habit, General Kennedy or something. And then the rest of it, I think it's about doing sprints and breaks. So for me, if I have to intently focus on something, ideally I try to keep those at 20 or 30-minute intervals, and then I try to take a 10 minutes where I can, kind of let my mind expand and loose and get up, walk around, get some blood flowing, and then I can go back and focus again. That to me helps me keep, kind of my frontal lobe stimulated and active, vice getting too methodical. Once I start obsessing on a thing, and then obviously, you get into it. But I think if you're trying to, that's not sustainable typically, at least not for myself. So I try to do these sprints and then breaks of intense focus and then activity to kind of keep it going for a longer period of time. And if I can get a nap, which is rare, but if I could get a nap, you take it. You take a 15 or 20-minute, power nap, especially if you're getting sub 6 hours of sleep a night. I find that helps you sustain.
Yeah, I would think so. So, just a couple questions left, if you don't mind. One of the reasons I was really interested in talking with you is that career development, that career path that you took, and we talk on this show quite a bit about, like, lack of a better term, but leveling up, which I'm sure you're aware of, or the idea that you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with or that are closest to you, that kind of idea, right? And how to increase that average of 5. What are some of your, do you have any strategies or tips or lessons for people who are looking to get out of just kind of their rut maybe, or the position they're in, and they want to work with people like yourself and people like a general like Stanley McChrystal that are comparable in their agency, so this could be some really mentorship roles with command staff, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so what I would say, at least what served me well, is always look for the diversity opportunity. I find complacency to be the biggest risk for not being able to sustain or perform at a high level. And it's really easy if you get good at something to kind of do more of it. So if you get promoted in a job to kind of do the job you just had instead of the job that you're in now. There's a great saying that a mentor of mine said once. A guy named General John Vines is really a legend and a god of a guy. He commanded the 18th Airborne Corps, was Stan McChrystal's mentor. Just a remarkable man. And he said, focus on the things that only you can affect. And if you step back and you look at your job or what role you're in, and you say, am I the only person that can do this task or function? Well, then you're probably doing the right thing. Oftentimes, the answer to that question is it's not. You're doing something that somebody else could be doing. So you could be empowering somebody else to do that job, which is going to give you skill. You're just not comfortable because you think you could do it, 10, 15% better. But the reality is you're doing something that's more comfortable for you, and you got to get out of that comfort zone and focus on those things that you need to get better at. And the way you do that, for me, is constantly looking for those opportunities outside of your existing job or the next job that's going to put you in a position to really stretch and focus yourself. So I think that mindset and that relentless commitment to constant, never-ending improvement has to be really a mindset you got to take as an individual. And the other way to kind of summarize it is winning mindset, which or warrior mindset. And in that situation, what it means is that winning is not an outcome. It's not like a mountaintop you get to and you go, oh, okay, I'm there. It really is a journey and a constant commitment to trying to be better on a daily basis. And you have to keep focusing on that. What you think you get to where you're trying to go, then you got to keep moving that bar constantly if you're going to be successful. And surrounding yourself with people that are better than you and challenging you is the fastest, best way to do that, because they're going to be the constant reminder and feedback that you're not there yet. And quite frankly, and if you find yourself becoming complacent because you think you are there, well, then you're probably hanging out with the wrong crowd. You got to go find the next crowd. Doesn't mean you can't be great friends and keep those relationships, but you got to continually be pushing yourself to go into harder things. I mean, when I first started playing water polo, the way I got good was I had virtually no talent, but what I did was fortunate enough that I played with people a lot older than me that had a lot more skill, and the coaches threw me in there, and I just had a tenacity to want to try to keep up. And as long as you kept doing that, then it naturally pulls you, up to a higher level of standard constantly. So I would say you got to do the same thing in work. You got to look for that job that's not standard, that you're not comfortable with, and go do it. Do something outside of your expertise that's going to broaden your perspective and mind. You're going to learn things that can come back in, you can apply to your role and position. In the agency environment, law enforcement, there's hundreds of different roles and responsibilities that will make you a more effective at your job, and I would try to go find those. Some of those things, the problem when people don't is because they're not rewarded in career progression, and I would challenge some of those assumptions and be active with whoever the career manager is and or your mentor, to help create awareness around it so it can allow you to continue to grow.
That's a great spot to end on. Thank you very much, David Silverman, co-author of Team of Teams, New Rules of Engagement for a Complex World, CEO of CrossLead. Where can people find you? Are you on Twitter, Instagram, or I know the company? Yeah.
Just go find CrossLead.com, and you can easily get a hold of me. I am on Twitter, and DK Silverman's my handle. I'm not as active as I should be, but I am there.
David, thanks for your time, and really appreciate all these tips and your insight. It's pretty neat to see someone who's really done so much, at the same age. So appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy, so a lot of great tips for being a leader and also just kind of that leveling up. So thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate you having me.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation with David. To follow him on Twitter, it's at dksilverman.com. That'd be stupid. At dksilverman. Give him a follow, and you can see inside his mind a bit. Pretty cool and fascinating guy who has experienced a lot. As always, please follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Squad Room. If you have a moment, please consider leaving a review of the show. It's very helpful in getting the word out. And the one thing I really want you to do is share this information, or share this episode, or share one of the other episodes that's a favorite of yours. Share it with someone else who needs to hear the content of the show. Get the word out and help us help other officers achieve their absolute best. That's what we're working for. I'm working on it myself. I am a work in progress, and I'm documenting that, and I want to find other officers that want the same. And the more of us, the more power we have as a collective unit, the more change we can bring to our agencies, to the profession, and to, of course, the public's perception of us as well. Also want to thank SB Tactical at sbtactical.com for their support of their show. They're a veteran-owned and American-made company. You can check out their active shooter training system, iCombat, at sbtactical.com, or their in-home iCombat Pro for the individual officer. So until next time, stay safe and take care of each other.